So how do I get this up on the screen? Right now, all I'm seeing is the, the thing we see on the small thing, like the names.
Well, I wonder if the crowd probably do to keep saying it. Mark Baker. Mark Baker, my name. Clinical psychologist, I run a Christian counseling center called La Vie, that's French for life. And actually, we're considering putting up.
No, I gotta start the video on switching there.
Exactly. And I've been coming here for 30 years, really.
Okay, it's being recorded and the video is on, but now all they see is.
So, we're going to be talking about power struggle, okay, in the next couple of weeks. I know none of you have those, but you know.
Oh, that's why I turned that on. So I turned that off,
So
right?
you'll be able
Okay.
to offer this information.
Okay.
You know, for free.
Okay.
Are we?
Hi, Linda. Steve Ruth. Somehow we got muted.
Ah, good. Thank you. I
Not
appreciate
just you. I don't know what happened. Oh, there it is.
So I made this comment I was on a website that had professionals who were dialoguing with each other. I made this comment that the Bible's best-selling book. And a woman I'll call Amanda got really mad at me. She said, well, that's, like I'm, tricking her.
She thought I was going to talk about the New York Times bestselling book, not the Bible. And I said, well, it's actually, I'm just giving a fact. Actually, in my comment, I said it sells like hotcakes every year. And she was very upset with that because she said in her words, the Bible's only read today by guilty priests or owners of sleazy hotels. That was her reaction. Well, I wish the guilty priests would read the Bible, and I think she was referring to the Gideon Bible that they put in hotels.
Yeah.
So they have one there. So she was really mad. And I said, well, it sells at least 25 million copies every year. It's in over 100 languages, and those numbers are low. It's actually many, many more millions than that. But she'd have none of it. And she just basically cut me off. Now, we have a bad reputation among certain people. Do you know this in the public, that certain people in the public don't like Christians, and that if you say, you've met them, right? So you kind of have to choose your crowd if you're going to admit that. And so we need to work on that. Our press is not good. So people like Amanda are I don't like Christians. I don't like what they stand for. I don't like how they conduct their lives, and I don't even want to talk to you about it. It wasn't even open at all to have a conversation. Well, I kept following her. I just every now and then I would check back in on her page and kind of see how she's doing. I know she wasn't following me. And it was about 6 or 8 months later, there was a crisis in her life, and she lost someone who was very close to her, and she's posting about it, and how terrible it was. And she mentions that she happened to find a Bible. And she started opening it and reading it. And she said she couldn't believe how comforted she was by reading this book. Now, I love that story because there's something powerful about this book. There's something powerful and applicable to our lives today that if you really read it, and you need to read it, and you read it with an open mind, you're going to glean from it power that helps you heal in your life, power that helps you with your personal problems. So my orientation as a psychologist is filtered through those same principles in the Bible. I think there are brilliant psychological principles that if you're open to it and you listen to it, can guide us and give us a powerful way to heal our personal problems. Powerful way. And this is, this woman obviously was not a Christian, and she was not super pious at all. She was just looking for help. Just looking for help. What does this book have to say to me that was helpful? And I didn't, text her or do anything. I just let it go. I didn't want to spoil the moment. So I just was glad that she was able to find it. She didn't get it. She found this mysterious power to heal her hurt in the Bible. There's mysterious power to solve your struggles. Well, at the end of his life, Jesus gathered his closest friends around him. And they were expecting him, if you've read the story, they were expecting him to set up a political power. The disciples were following him thinking, this guy's got it. He's got the it factor. And we're going to rise up and fight off the Romans, and we're going to set up our own power system here and change the world, because this guy had miraculous power to do things. We're going to correct all the wrongs. The government of that day was so wrong and so totalitarian and making such bad choices. You think our government was bad? That was worse. And so that they were rallying around him thinking, and Jesus said, even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you. They were behind him, really believing in the system of powerful government that he was going to set up. Well, when the soldiers came to get him, you know what happened. Peter thought, this is our moment, pulls out a sword, cuts off the soldier's ear, and says, Jesus, bring the angels. Now is our time. We're going to establish our kingdom right now, here and now. Fix all these problems. You know what happened? Jesus said, Peter, everybody who lives by the sword dies by the sword. He picked up the guy's ear, stuck it back on his head, healed him. And the disciples were flabbergasted. Like, what? You're going to let them take you away? Where's the new power system, the new government? Where's the new system we're going to set up here on earth? Fight all the bad guys, clean house. So they did what any rational human being would have done in that moment. They all ran away. Well, this guy's a phony. What good does it do if you have all the power of the universe and you don't use it to correct all the wrongs in our world today? Their view of power was very focused. They wanted him to control all the bad things that were out of control. And just like Amanda, they didn't get it. What is the point if you have all the power in the universe and you're not using it to control all the things that are wrong? So their view of power was control. And that is probably the most basic understanding of power, is to control. If I had the power to control things, then I would be the most powerful person in the room. Well, Jesus had other ideas. What I'm going to hopefully suggest over the next couple of weeks is that that's a very limited view of power. The power I view as kind of on a continuum. I'm going to explain that as we go along in the next couple of weeks. And on one end of the continuum is control. The power to control is pretty basic, like physical control over things. That's not bad. It's just a limited understanding of what it means to be powerful. And I don't blame you, do you? Why didn't Jesus call the angels down right then, set up a benevolent kingdom, and himself as the supreme leader? He could have written the Bible himself, so there's a lot of problems there. Appointed the disciples as his main leaders, had up clear instructions about how we should behave and solve all the conflict we have right now. Think of all the unnecessary ways that the world would have been changed for the better. Poverty would have been eradicated. All the pointless human suffering that would have never happened over the last 2,000 years. We would all be happier living in harmony today and speaking Aramaic. Why didn't he do that? I think they had a legitimate point. We could have saved us all a lot of grief if you just would have done that. Set up a central control of power and right all the wrongs in our society. Well, Jesus had a different understanding of power. I think we're beginning to grasp it now, but control over others, physical control over your environment is a form of power, but it's a limited understanding of power. On the other end of the spectrum, and there's gradations in between, is what I'm going to call authority. There's the power to control, and there's the authority to inspire. There's the power to make people do what you want, and there's the power to inspire people to want what you want. That's also power. And I think that's the way Jesus conducted himself psychologically. Look at his examples. Who did he control? Who did he dominate? Who did he make? Even today, he doesn't make you do anything. God doesn't make you do anything, right? But if you ask him for help, he inspires you from within to want to do things, to want to do the right thing. So we're going to try to make this distinction, the distinction between the power to control and the power to inspire. Psychologically, we've got a lot of different terms for these two aspects of power. But I think it's important because I think most of the power struggles we have with ourselves, with other people, with our spouses, and with organizations is we're trying to control things. We think that's what it means to be powerful, is to control ourselves, others, and even organizations. And it can work at times, but it's pretty limited in its effectiveness in its short range. So I'm going to talk about a personal kind of power that Jesus conducted his relationships with. It's the way he acted, it's the way he was with people. It's not really a philosophy, it's a way of being. And I think if you kind of parse apart the way he was powerful with people psychologically, then hopefully it'll help you in your relationships today. So I'm not going to talk about that much about his spiritual power, his power to heal, or power to save. I mean, there's lots of sermons on that people can do much better than I can. And I believe in all those things. I'm a believer in all of that. But I'm a psychologist. So I want to talk about how he was with people and the way he was personally powerful. So we can model our lives after that. How do you want to be? How do you want to solve power struggles? How do you want to be powerful in your life? In what way? I heard there was a sort of a political figure say just recently, I have no desire to be a powerful person. I desire to be a person who inspires. So I thought he gets it. He gets it. At least he's got his focus on the right direction. Let me give you an example of someone who struggled with a personal, interpersonal power struggle. We'll talk about intrapersonal power struggles next week, but one power struggle he was having with himself. I'll call him John. And he came to me for help because he was in so much pain he couldn't even put it into words. He was referred to me for psychotherapy after his discharge from the military. He'd had multiple tours, and he saw action, and the stories he told me were quite frightening and would bring you to tears if I told you what he went through. He didn't trust me. He'd seen shrinks in the military and didn't find it that helpful. He said they gave him what he called manualized therapy. They were going through a manual to try and help him with his PTSD, severe PTSD, with nightmares, flashbacks. And of course, he didn't trust me because I had not seen what he had seen. I've never been in the military. I had not only witnessed what he'd witnessed, but I had not done what he had done. Now, what I have found in working with vets, the core of their PTSD is not just what they saw, it's what they did that they're traumatized by. They have to bring that back. How could I, as a decent human being, have done those things? And it's an awful, violent place when you're in battles. You know, you actually saw action. And we expect these men and women to go over there and fight like that, and then come back here and pretend like it all never happened. You know, and they're just supposed to, you know, go on about it. You know, dress up and go to church and pretend like life isn't scary and that you didn't do those things, right? And it's a terrible challenge for them. And you probably know this because I remember the Vietnam War. We had more Vietnam vets kill themselves by suicide after they came back than we lost in the war there. Because
Really?
yeah, because it was so awful. You have to come back and integrate into everyday life and try to be normal, having done what you've done and seen what you've seen and lived the way you've lived. So I have a ton of respect for people in the military and thank them for the service. So he didn't talk about his combat experiences with anyone. And gradually he did with me because he didn't believe they would understand. And this is a critical piece. He was actually too ashamed to talk about it. And they can't talk about that part, that they feel shame for having gone through what they've gone through. And this is a very difficult part of all PTSD. Anyone who suffers from PTSD also suffers from shame. And it's paradoxical. You know, why would you feel bad about yourself because something happened to you that was bad? I mean, it kind of doesn't make sense, but they do anyway. Because we try to make the world make sense. If something bad happened and you were involved, we tend to somehow find a way to blame ourselves. You know, find a way to somehow I should have done this, I should have done that, if I'd done this, if I'd done. I hadn't walked down that street that night, and we blame ourselves. So dealing with that's tricky because nobody wants to talk about their shame. He drank excessively and got into fights in bars, and he rarely lost those fights. This one moment, he was at a restaurant. So here I'm doing psychotherapy with a guy trying to help him integrate back in society. He tells me about this weekend. He drove his car to the restaurant, and the valet who pulled up drove his car too fast. He didn't like that. So he cursed at him, and he hoped that the valet would strike him first, because he has the phrase in his head, because I knew I would be afraid for my life. That's a legal phrase. If you're afraid for your life, you can use lethal force. He knew that. But he didn't. The valet didn't take the bait, so he spit on him, hoping he would strike him then. You know, because the guy who strikes first, you know, it's your fault, right? And within seconds, he was surrounded by all the valets. You know, he was around him. He was hoping somebody would strike him. He knew that he could hurt all of them, and he believed they should hurt him. And he was living with that kind of conflict. You know, I deserve to be beaten for what I've done, but I'm going to go down fighting. Challenging guy. He didn't get in a fight that night. He was able to de-escalate it and drive away. So, in wanting to help John, I sought out a consultation from a psychologist that specializes in treating trauma survivors. And her therapy utilized toy figures. And she would get people to take the figures and enact scenes. You know, well, what did they do? What did he do? You know, so she had all these figurines around her office. She worked a lot with kids too, trauma survivors. And so I went over to her office and I looked around the office and I saw Superman and Batman and Darth Vader. They're all in one place, and Jesus was off in a corner somewhere else all by himself. And I just asked, well, why? Why do you have Superman, Darth Vader over here, and Jesus is over there? And they said, well, this area represents power, and that's benign. Really? So that's what we think. So power is to be able to outsmart everybody in the room, Batman, or beat up everybody in the room, Superman. That's power. But Jesus is benign. It's just benign. So we pick a benign figure for, I don't know what do you need benign for? I don't even know, but maybe comfort or something. Superman and Darth Vader represent power, and Jesus is simply a benign figure. That's what we think. That's what power is, ability to control the scene, to control other people. That's what we think. That's what she thought. Jesus doesn't do that, so he's benign. Darth Vader is powerful, Jesus is benign. But she actually helped me understand John better. In that moment, I could see John was trying to power through his emotions. He was deeply conflicted inside, deeply conflicted over what he'd done, felt shame, he was angry, grieving, but he was going to power through it. I'm going to get control of my emotions. Some of you believe that's a good strategy. I know you do. I'm just going to get control of my emotions. Control, that's power. Get control of my emotions. Well, it saved those valets that night from getting beaten up. So, okay, I'll give them that. It doesn't stop the nightmares. Okay, so it works in certain scenarios. Getting in control of emotions works in certain scenarios, but doesn't heal anything. There's no healing in control. Now, it keeps you from beating up people who don't deserve to be beat up, so I'm going to give you that. But it wasn't healing John. Because John was in unspeakable pain, he was frightened. He just wanted to get the pain under control. And he referred to any expression, no matter how mild, of emotion as losing it, losing my stuff, that's what he would say. Any emotion was losing my stuff. So, all right, so expressing your emotions, the very thing we need to heal you is a sign of weakness. Getting it under control, that's a sign of strength. Okay, how's that working for you? Dr. Phil might have said, not so good. In terms of healing, actually healing the conflict that he was in. Control is a form of power, but it's not the only one. Turning to Superman for protection is different from turning to Jesus. Those are two different sources of power, two different ideas of how to face your conflicts within yourself. As I said earlier, John had already gone to therapy at the VA, and he ended up thinking that the guy didn't understand, the guy didn't care. He was just kind of going through the manual, putting in the time. And certainly John wasn't going to open up to him. And if you can't open up, then you can't get to the feelings that are underneath that are causing the pain in the first place, right? The power to cover over pain is not the same as the power to face it so it can be healed. Those are two different kinds of power. There's a time for both. He already had the power to control his pain, but he didn't have the power to make the nightmares go away. So I realized I was going to have a difficult time getting John to surrender his need for control, because this guy was really good at it. Need for control. You just felt it when he walked in the room. It's just the way he walked, the way he talked. He's under strict control, which you want when you're in a foxhole, right? Which doesn't work when you come back home. You try to relate to your wife. Big problem we have is with vets coming back and beating up their spouses. They don't know how to have a fight verbally. Something clicks and they click into what they were trained to do. Power of physical control is not a bad thing. I'm going to say that again. Jesus displayed that power himself. He had miracles. He controlled the water, controlled diseases, he controlled death itself, so power to control things is not a bad thing. It's just one aspect of power. And large groups of people followed Jesus to witness this miraculous power of control, but Jesus was disappointed with those who followed him because of his miracles. Remember him saying that? Disappointed with you. What? You don't get it. That's not how I want you to live. I want you to live even more powerful. Jesus had been given the power from God to transform the human hearts. And he didn't do this by control or domination. It was through the authority that he had in people's lives that made them want what he wanted. Change people from the inside out. It's a different kind of power. That's why he didn't set up the kingdom. It's why he didn't write the Bible. It's why you're not speaking Aramaic today. Because he wants you to live a more powerful life other than just the one that he told you to. You do it because I told you so. No, he wants you to figure out what it's like to live from the inside out. I live this way because I believe it's right. And he lets you choose. You choose. What do you believe is right? What do you believe is the most powerful way to live? You choose. That's the kind of power that John actually needed to live somehow the opposite of control. Trying to control your feelings wasn't working. We needed to figure out a way for him to actually surrender his need for control in order for him to find a more powerful way to heal those nightmares. So the psychology of power is, as I said, on this continuum. We've got control on one end and authority on the other. The psychologists have different words for this. We call this force versus power. Hannah Arendt, we're going to talk about later. This is the hard kind of power, the soft kind of power. This is transactional power. This is transformational power. Control versus authority, power versus influence. So I'm going to keep making those distinctions over the next few weeks, so you can see it's not one's bad and one's good. It's they're different, and there's a different time for each of them. There's a time to take control of the situation, there's a time to inspire. I mean, if you just have one understanding of power and you're going to solve your power struggles with yourself or other people by trying to control it, it's limited. You're going to be limited in your effectiveness. So wealth, strength, intelligence, popularity, any physical property does not give you power in the sense of authority. It makes you potentially powerful in the sense of authority. I know people who are very wealthy, strong, intelligent, popular, they have lots of physical resources, but from the sense of authority, they're not powerful until they influence other people from the inside out. So they're able to live in such a way that empowers people from the inside out. And that's long lasting. Controlling people only works as long as you have the power to control them, right? Inspiring people lives on beyond your relationship. They want to live this way because it's the right way to live. That's what Jesus was trying to get us to see. I want you to live this way because you'll keep living that way. Even after I've gone back into heaven, you'll keep living this way because it's from the inside out. You're not just doing it because I'm here. Many of you who've raised kids, you know that, you want them to integrate these values so they live them themselves, not just act this way because you're standing there watching them. You want to know how they act when you're not there. You want them to be able to internalize these values. That's what we teach them, is to internalize these values so that they'll make good decisions on their own. And there's some ages there. I've still got a couple of 17-year-olds that you don't really know, I'm not so sure what they're doing out there, but I'm praying for them. So in psychology, things have changed. We're a new science. And I have to say, as I get older, I find myself apologizing for psychology more and more. We've changed a lot. Well, it's a social science, right? So it means it changes as society changes. So what we once thought was right, society changed, so we don't believe that anymore. We have all this research that we were sure we were right 50 years ago. And now we look back and I go, oops, we weren't right about that. And we've evolved. And so we're trying to catch up, and as society changes, my science changes. So when people say to me, well, research says, there's research that says, I almost always say, now what research? I'd like to read that, because I don't trust it anymore. That's why they made us take courses in statistics so we could read the research ourselves. Because I've read psychological research papers where the conclusion has really nothing to do with the data. It's shocking. So I'm just saying, read for yourself, be educated. Don't just believe everything everybody tells you. But anyway, psychology has changed. And Freud was brilliant. He was brilliant. And he had this medical model of how to heal people, how to solve your internal struggles. He was a medical doctor, and all of his friends were medical doctors. So they had this very outdated notion of control. The medical doctor's in control. They're in control. So you're the patient, so you're sick, you come to me, I'm the doctor, I'm in control, I'll tell you what's wrong with you and we'll fix you. And so it's very hierarchical in its power. It was about control and controlling symptoms, people getting control. And long story short, Freud's idea was, we're going to help you understand these instinctual feelings you've got inside, and then it's your job to disavow them and stop acting that way. So once I point that out to you, that's really immature of you. You're supposed to stop it. And yeah, right, it's straightforward, very straightforward theory, you know, you've got these impulses, don't do it anymore, you know, once I point it out to you. Believe me, I'm very much convincing his theory. But the power of control was the zeitgeist of all of society, and the research that was going on then, like separation and individuation. We believe that was the goal of health to grow up and separate and be an individual. We don't believe that anymore. That was wrong. Margaret Mahler was wrong. So we've shifted, and in what direction have we shifted? Away from control. We're thinking, well, that's only partly right. Only sometimes can you knock it off. There are certain situations where I say, don't do that anymore, and you don't. You know who John Gottman is? John Gottman, the marital research guy? No, you know, he's probably the best known marital researcher in the world. Probably he's done more research on couples and helping them resolve their problems, written books. He's on CNN all the time and television. So he's famous. So I had this really difficult couple. I sent him up to Gottman because he actually sees people. So he kept them for a week and worked with them. They were a really tough couple. I didn't want them. So go see John Gottman, you know. He's the best. And he was with them for a week. At the end of the week, you know what he did? He was so frustrated. He told the guy, knock it off. He used expletives in there. The most famous researcher, you know. So we're all, our gods have clay feet. Anyway, the time for you, the time when you can just stop it. But when it's a serious conflict with yourself, like John had, and many of the other people that hopefully I'll have time to tell you today, that doesn't work. Just controlling the symptoms, just controlling your feelings is limited. There's another kind of power that requires vulnerability and surrendering control that most of us actually need to solve those chronic power struggles. And psychology realizes that now. We now realize that just giving people advice doesn't change them as much as having a relationship with them where they come up with their own advice. Where most of you probably already know how to live a better life, but you can't get out of your own way to do it. You don't need me to tell you, you already know what to do, but you can't do it. And so what we've discovered in psychology now is that you form a relationship with your clients, your patients, and out of that relationship comes a new kind of power, an authority for you to take charge of your life. You're empowered from the inside out to do the things you already know you should be doing, but you can't get out of your own way to do it. It's a different kind of power. So now the most popular form of psychoanalysis today, you know, Freud started psychoanalysis, it's called relational psychoanalysis. That's what it's called. The relational school. What we're doing is forming relationships with people to help empower them from the inside out. Not me helping them discover their Oedipal complex and telling them to knock it off. We tried that for 50 years, didn't work. So now what we're doing is forming a relationship that empowers people from the inside out to have better relationships. So what's the sign of psychological health today? How good are your relationships? Are they working for you? Do you have people in your life that you love, friends? Do you go to church, hang out with people? Do they like you? Do you like them? That's a sign of health. That's how we measure health. How connected are you? What is the quality of your relationships? Heinz Kohut was the president of the American Psychoanalytic Association. He was strict Freudian first half of his career, and then he realized, okay, that's not working, and he completely flipped and created a whole new science. It's called self-psychology. It's a terrible name. It's not about self, but that's what they call it. And his theory is this: healing comes from a relationship with someone greater than you, outside you, that knows you and cares about you. That's actually his theory. Wait a minute. Healing comes from a relationship with someone greater than you, outside you, that knows and cares about you. There's an atheist. That was his theory. I'm convincing it, like I convinced Freud. But that's his theory. Isn't that interesting? Now, he thought the analyst was supposed to be the greater person outside. I call it idealization need, who then pays attention to you, and there's a mirroring need that we pay attention to mirror. Then there's a twinship need that comes in there too. We had different terms for it, but that's what the theory is. That's how you're hardwired to be. That's the most powerful way to live. Figure out how to have relationships that are confident and strong and attuned, and you have a connection. You have a connection. So the authority of therapy, and the authority that John needed, was not me telling him what to do, not me giving him advice, not me telling him to knock it off, except for the fighting part. I did point out to him that would make me look bad. You can't be my client and be telling people that and beating people up. It's really bad press for me. He needed a different kind of experience where that power came from within, and he would give me the authority to have power in his life. He would surrender control to be vulnerable to his feelings, and that gave me then an authoritative power to help him transform his life. Not by me taking control of it, not by me telling him what to do or giving him homework. None of that was going to work, not with John. Power of control can stop pain temporarily. Experiencing the relational authority of a relationship with someone who knows you and who's strong enough to help you has the power to heal it. That's what we all need, those kinds of relationships. See, trauma is not just psychological injury. It's different from medical trauma. Medical trauma is physical injury to your body. That's what they call trauma, physical injury. Psychological trauma is different. Psychological trauma is psychological injury that's overwhelming emotion that you have to go through alone. That's what creates trauma. You're not hardwired to deal with overwhelming psychological injury by yourself. We're fundamentally relational creatures. That to solve your problems inside you, you need a relationship with someone outside you to help you solve your problems in you. You see the brilliance of Christianity. Now we have a God who's someone greater than us, outside us, who cares about us, and we live in community where we can have these kinds of relationships that can be healing. The fact that you're here today tells me that you have healing relationships in your life. You have an access to this kind of power. Psychological trauma is overwhelming psychological injury that you have to suffer through alone. And I work with people from all different backgrounds, and I have people who have had horrible childhood, terrible trauma. The current, just recently elected president of the American Psychological Association is an African-American woman from, I think Encino or somewhere up near me in the valley. And she openly talks about her traumatic background, and the trauma that she grew up with. And when she lectures, she talks about it openly. And she's such a well-grounded, beautiful person. You think, I want to know her. I gotta want to go to therapy with her because she just seems so balanced and whole. And you wonder, how is that possible? And then I know other people who grew up in lives were fine. The parents stayed together. They weren't abused. There was nothing wrong with them. And they're jerks. They're just terrible people. How is that possible? How is that possible? How can someone go through so much struggle and turn out healthy, and someone cannot have much struggle at all and they turn out so messed up? How's that possible? You find in the lives of these people who suffered through trauma and came out okay, there was always someone there for them. It was a grandmother, it was an aunt, it was a teacher, it was a pastor. And when they tell their story, they all point to that person. It was my Aunt Mamie, and she was there for me. I didn't have any parents, but I had her. That's what you find. She didn't have to suffer alone. And that takes psychological injury and keeps it from becoming trauma. Trauma, which is ongoing and you have to try to solve alone. You're not good at solving things alone. There's a synergy that happens spiritually. There's a different kind of power, a relational power. In psychology today, when traumatized people come for us, we have a phrase that we use. Our job is to create a relational home for their pain. That's what we're trying to do. A relational home for your pain. That's what I'm trying to do. A relational home for your pain. And then watch God do his work. Not me. We're trying to create that kind of relationship that's healing. Jesus taught us about healing through this kind of authoritative way of being with people. He came as a Jewish rabbi who was not allowed to even speak the name of God because it was too great. Then Jesus called God Abba, which was daddy. Flipped it on its head. He didn't teach people about principles of truth. He said, I am the truth. Isn't that an interesting phrase? He didn't say, I'm going to tell you the truth. He said, I am the truth. In order for you to know the truth, you have to have a relationship with it. That's what he said. You have to have a relational experience of truth. It's not intellectual, it's experiential. He was like Martin Heidegger on steroids. Sorry, probably some of you know who that is. It didn't teach others from a position of superiority. He said, I've called you friends. Almost all of the examples we have of Jesus talking with people, it was in their homes, it was at their weddings, it was where they lived. He was in relationship with them. Now think about this. This 33-year-old itinerant Jewish rabbi didn't write a book, no television, no radio, no newspapers, no social media. And he's the most influential person in all of history. Today, has more followers than any other person in history. How is that possible? Yeah. Miraculous, isn't it? There was a way of living that he lived that influenced people that was so powerful, they're still following him today. A third of the planet follows him. That makes him far from benign, don't you think? He talked about a certain kind of power that transforms people, that you're right, isn't about control. It's not about domination. It's not about beating up everybody in the room, but it's about empowering people to live a way that's transformational from the inside out. That's powerful, but it's not benign. So it was years ago that I saw John. So it was, I can remember how long, it was a long time ago. When I saw him, I kept an empty chair in the room. One of my professors suggested this, so there's no place there's a chair over here that's empty, right? For Jesus to be in the room with us. It's just a metaphor. Right? Like imagine, it's a very personal process, and I believe God meets us there. Martin Buber is a famous Jewish theologian, and he got famous on this principle of I-thou relationships. His idea is there's a way you relate to people that's genuine, it's non-defensive, it's vulnerable, it's powerful, it's I-thou, or you can relate to people like they're an object and it's I-it, he calls it. So you're relating people like they're just an object in your world to manipulate around and control, that's I-it relationship. Are you having a genuine relationship of authority where you're vulnerable and you're able to be there in a way that's authoritative, not controlling? And Buber's idea is if you have this I-thou relationship with people, God shows up. His idea is you're all created in the image of God. Everybody is. I don't care if you're Christian or not. You're created in the image of God. And if you are living out of that image, God shows up. So God does the work. God does the healing. God shows up and do the healing. You're just being who you were created to be. I'm just the image of God here. I'm just an image bearer showing up to relate. Like John the Baptist, he must be greater, I must become less. We must decrease our images of control and power in order to allow God to give us the power of influence for ourselves and for others from within. So there are no images of Superman or Darth Vader in my office, only an empty chair where I imagine Jesus to be sitting. John is a lot like Peter. All who draw the sword will die by the sword. He was a lot that way. He was struggling to stay in control in every way he could when he first met me. He hired me to get his feelings under control, and I actually helped him surrender that control in order to have a better life. So it's only by surrendering to the influence of someone outside of himself that he could release this need for control that was based on fear. He was afraid. That's why he needed to be controlled, because he was afraid. There's no way this guy was ever going to tell you he was afraid. So after many months of therapy, John stopped fighting in bars, and the nightmares eventually went away. He's less attracted to superhuman fantasies of control to numb his pain, and is replacing the Darth Vader and Superman images of power in his head. He's really trying to figure out how it is that he was able to be healed of these nightmares by a relationship with some shrink that never served in the military. I've never been there. Before, surrender meant defeat to him. Surrender means defeat. That's what it meant. Now it means surrendering control is a pathway to a certain kind of power that I didn't have before. Power to heal my own nightmares. Surrendering control. He hired me to help him get control of his life, to help him surrender control to find a better one. Jesus said, whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. I know he means that spiritually, but I mean it psychologically. I think it was a psychologically brilliant idea of how to live a more powerful life. One of the most popular books on power is called The 48 Laws of Power. Has anybody read that? Good, don't. I'm going to summarize it for you. 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. It has 56,000 reviews on Amazon. It's still number 3 in social psychology, and it's 23 years old. A 23-year-old book is still number 3 in the social psychology section of Amazon. Here, I'm just going to give you 8 of the 48. Never outshine the master for fear of retribution. Jesus said, trust God. Greene says, never put too much trust in friends. Learn how to use your enemies. Jesus said, I've called you friends. Yeah, he's creepy. Hugely popular book. Best-selling. Yeah. Greene says, conceal your intentions. Jesus says, preach the gospel everywhere. Greene says, get others to do the work for you, but always take the credit. Yeah, Jesus said, blessed are the humble. Greene says, use selective honesty and generosity to disarm your victims. Jesus says, give as it has been given unto you. Greene says, pose as a friend, work as a spy. Jesus says, I am the Lamb of God. Greene says, crush your enemy totally. Jesus says, love your enemies. Who's right? A lot of people in America think Greene's right because they only have one definition of power. It's control. Control. If that's your only definition of power, then yeah, you want to do all those things. Crush people, get to the top, keep your enemies closer, all that stuff. Jesus didn't believe any of that stuff and didn't teach any of that stuff. And he's got more followers on Amazon than Greene does. He sells more copies of his book that he didn't write than Greene. So how can we make sense of this contradiction unless we have different understandings of power, right? So the 48 laws of power mean the 48 laws of control over other people. And most of the books you read, the self-help books you read are about that. About how to make women attracted to you, or if you're a woman, how to make men attracted to you, and how to seduce them and deceive them and fool them and control them. That's a certain kind of power that will get you some things in life, but it won't heal your pain. And if you're having a power struggle with yourself, control isn't going to go very far. You have to figure out this other kind of authority that has something to do with surrender, has something to do with vulnerability. And surrender, in America, surrender is a bad word. We think surrender is weakness. And surrender means you give up. No, it doesn't. And you're surrendering to something greater than you, outside of you, that is actually powerful. It's the only way you can experience that power is by surrendering the need for control. It's a scary but powerful way to live. So, if this authority that I'm talking about is really the higher form of power and really the more influential, and it's going to change lives much better than control, then why is control so overwhelmingly popular? Why are 56,000 people rating Greene's book and saying it's great, it's the best thing I've ever read? And I read, those are the principles in the book. 56,000 people said. 2 thumbs up. Because people are afraid. And when you're afraid, you want to control. Fear makes us want to control. We want to make things concrete. We want to make things concrete and workable and something that's manageable. When I'm scared, it's very hard for me to be vulnerable when I'm scared. When I'm scared, I don't want to be vulnerable. I want to just control things when I'm scared. And that's your biggest enemy. The opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is fear. So what keeps you from being a more loving person to yourself and other people? It's fear. Fear makes you want to be controlling. John was afraid.
Can you say that again?
Fear makes you want to be controlled. When you're afraid, you gravitate towards control. It requires you to be able to face your fear and to be able to feel safe in order to be more abstract. So this notion of authority is more abstract. This notion of control is very concrete, very clear. I can beat you up or you can beat me up probably now. That's very clear and concrete, right? This is very abstract. I'm talking, wait, being vulnerable is more powerful. I'm inspiring from me. That's requires an abstract way of thinking, an abstract way of being. Spiritual. This is spiritual. This is very concrete. So you struggle then when you're afraid to be more loving. It's very hard for you to be loving when you're afraid because you want to be controlled.
So I'm gonna risk being vulnerable.
Thank you. You always are. Thank you.
Anyway, so I had seen a therapist for many years, and I was very much hurt by this therapist, as you know, because then I went to see you.
You're supposed to say, and we healed that.
And when I came to see you, I was very straight with you, and I'm like, I'm watching you because you're helping me. I'm gonna watch you for every step you make, and if should you make a mistake. And then your answer was, I'm human, I will make mistakes, but we're gonna work through it together honestly. And so as you were talking today, it became even clearer for me what you were doing. Because it wasn't safe for me. And so I came basically like the man at the bar to say, hit me first, because I'm ready.
Yep.
And you were in the process of disarming me with your truth. And at the same time, you created an environment in that room that I felt slow. I mean, you had to earn me my trusting you, but the whole idea was for me to feel safe and you to become obsolete.
Right.
In my presence.
Yeah.
Because slowly, I was like talking more and you were talking like, well, you never talked a lot anyway, but I'm just.
I know it's shocking to hear me today. I know.
Your presence was there with the higher presence there. And when you talked about that chair, it's always a reminder that it's not about us. It's about the transformational journey that I need to find within myself. And the other thing was trusting my own wisdom.
Right.
Trusting that I can take care of myself next time. You know, you gave me tools. And this is not political, but Michelle Obama wrote the book, her latest book. And one of the things her mother told her, because as she was 5 years old, she bought her a little alarm clock, taught her how to use it, starting kindergarten. And she says, okay, you're gonna turn the alarm clock the night before, you're gonna get dressed, you're gonna get breakfast, and I'm gonna show you how to go to school by yourself. Later on, she asked her mother, and she's like, why did I was horrified to go to school by myself. And she said, because my job was to make myself obsolete
Right.
in your life. It was to empower you to face your own fears.
Right.
So that's what you were, because I never had that before. Being with a person like yourself or a good friend or whatever is to help me find my own agency. It's not the therapist who hurt me. It's not, it happens, you know. It's finding that vulnerable place that's also very authoritative, and true power comes from that. I don't have to prove it to anyone because it's within me.
Right.
And you did that. Okay. He has cards of.
I owe Alice 10% of everything that comes. Thank you for sharing that. And you're very open and courageous in the process, and that's how it works. You show up, you're honest, and a relationship forms, and something happens from within. I believe God shows up.
Beyond us. So we don't-
It's beyond us. We're going to talk about that next week. When we surrender, what are we surrendering to? It's really surrendering to God. You're not surrendering to the other person. You're surrendering to a process where if you're truly being an image bearer there, God shows up, I believe. And that's where the healing happens. We don't do it. I don't do it. But God does it. We plant, we seed, we water, but God grants growth. Right? So thank you for sharing. It's true. if we show up in a certain way, we are all healers for each other. The church is meant to be that. And you're right. Therapists, the purpose of therapists especially is to empower you to be in a community where you could be a healing person to others. You were telling me earlier, you're out there healing other people now, taking that same experience out to others. That's the goal. That we become these healing members of a healing community. Well, I was going to talk about Ian, who's a perfectionist. A couple of you probably need to hear this one. It's a long story. Maybe I'll talk about Ian next week.
You want to get it right.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Don't want to screw up the perfectionist story. Anybody else have any questions they want to ask? This might be a good time for that. Comments you want to make?
Well, could I suggest an alternative paradigm
Good.
for Jesus, which I think you are highlighting a slightly different light. It strikes me, and I would think it would be resonate with somebody with a discipline in psychology, that Jesus's real Jesus is truth telling.
Right.
Jesus tells the Samaritan woman precisely who she is. He tells Peter in his shame about denying Christ that this was going to happen. And Peter jaw dropped. He recognizes the faith people who lowered the paralytic through the roof and how that faith healed. And I think that's a paradigm throughout Scripture, right? So the prophets are powerful. Why? Because they're truth tellers. In the case of ancient Israel, power. We're not built to be controlled. See Adam. Adam rebelled. And in part, he was empowered to rebel by the Father, right? Because if it wasn't within creation in the image of God, rebel, wouldn't have that. So I think there's a lot of simpatico between your discipline and Jesus. But I would say, even for example, with your illustration with John, I wouldn't be at all surprised if one of your breakthroughs with John was having him tell the truth to himself. And in telling the truth to himself, he realized how he was in shackles with all of this emotional, I'm going to say this and everybody come and beat me up when I do, all this emotional baggage from his experience. And once through his conversations and relationships with you, he was able to see that that's just what it was. It was baggage, it was not John. So I'm always impressed when I read what Jesus says, that there's no BS with Jesus.
Right.
And that's such,
It's authentic.
that is such a blessing to us to realize that if we have the courage to be truthful like Jesus is truthful in so many dimensions of our life, whether it be in power struggles in the office, or whether it be in relationships, or whether it be in the mirror,
Right.
we're much better served. And I think that's a variant. It's not entirely independent of your point about surrender, but it's a variant of the means by which you're able to loose these emotional shackles.
I think you're absolutely right. I think if you tell the truth, if you really tell the truth, you are making yourself vulnerable. It's risky. It's really risky to tell the truth. And how I like to say it is, I don't think niceness is a priority for me because I don't trust nice people. I think they're not telling the truth, but I value kindness. I think Jesus was not nice, but he was kind.
Yeah, big difference.
So there's a big difference, which means he was willing to tell you to your face what was wrong. That's not nice. You know, nice people, they won't tell you to your face how they feel about you. But he does it kindly, you know, speak the truth in love is just kind of like our principle here. So you have to be willing to risk hurting people's feelings to tell the truth. You've got to take, it's courageous. So I think if we as Christians, we miss that. We think we're supposed to be nice, which means we smile, we say nice things, but we don't tell the truth.
We indirectly accommodate the
Sadly,
innocent dishonesty
sadly.
that.
Well, sometimes blatant. But I think it is our job to tell the truth. I think that's right. I think what Jesus did. And at that time in history, it was radical for him to do that. Because the other forms of power were all about deception and control, this control into the power story. That's all they knew. And Jesus came along and was honest, and it was like, what? I mean, completely different way. This telling the truth was a completely different way at that point in history of being and being influential. So you're right, it's not the same, but it's a variant of why he was powerful. Yes.
Can I add something to what you said? And I'll beat you up later. You know, the woman at the well is a very powerful story for me personally. So although Jesus said the truth to her about who she was ashamed when she saw him. She was ashamed of her history. And when she found out that he already knew her history, it took away her shame. Because she saw him as this authority, this person, or this culture that she's not a part of. So she was trying to always go to the well when nobody else was there. She was hiding. But when she found out that he already knew all that, it didn't matter. I'm here for you now, and let's go from here. To me, because of my background, shame is a killer. And I think truth and love is very powerful to take away the shame, as well as everything else you said, which is also other truths that.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think that's one of the reasons why that story is so widely understood in our culture.
Yes.
For exactly that reason, from either a secular treatment perspective, but also
I think you're right. Because
It wasn't that he took it away.
No.
It was part of the dynamic between the two of them,
Exactly.
and she let it go.
Like he created the environment.
Yeah.
Now, here's an interesting ambiguity in that story, just to make it all about me.
oh no.
She runs away. Remember at the end of the story, she runs away and she's proclaiming what Jesus did to the rest of the town. Is she running from Jesus?
No.
Or correspondingly, is she running to tell the gospel?
Yeah.
Now, of course, aspirationally, we certainly hope it's the latter, right? But I sometimes wonder if that experience with her was just so, with Jesus, was just so mind-blowing, right? That she got to a point where this is too volatile, this is too scary. Who is this God? So I always read it as being kind of ambiguous, but as you said, I certainly hope it's because she was running to tell the Samaritans, by the way, the story of this.
Right. It's probably both. You know, she's probably terrified to be that vulnerable in that scene, and yet also so excited. Interesting that even though he told her a few things, she went back and said, he told me everything I ever did.
Yeah,
Like I was completely known by this guy. He just said a couple things, you know. And to your point, Alice, I think what happened to that moment, for me, the word is grace. What she experienced was grace. It was unmerited favor. Wait, you know my whole history and you accept me? That's what's healing. That experience of grace, not while I'm accomplished and doing everything right and on top of the world. No, when the things that I'm most embarrassed about you see and you accept me, that's grace. It's grace. Unmerited favor. That's what heals us. I think that's the only thing that heals shame is grace. In psychology, we call it acceptance, but that's kind of a poor second word for it.
That's a benign.
That's a benign word. Well, I got more stories, but I guess I'll come back next week and tell you. Thank you. Yeah, thank you all for coming. I will see you next week.
We in the first Sherman did it, so no.
What?